The Whitmore mansion was a palace of glass, marble, and money. It stretched across the edge of Central Park like a fortress of wealth, its walls glittering under the New York skyline. Inside, chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, and every surface shone as though it had never known dust. It was the home of Charles Whitmore, a man whose name was whispered across Wall Street, respected and feared in equal measure. Yet for all his billions, Charles Whitmore carried a wound. No amount of wealth could heal his son. Adrian was born with a rare spinal disorder that left his legs nearly useless. Doctors said he would never walk, never run, never live a normal life. By 14 years old, Adrian had never taken a step outside of his wheelchair. Charles had poured millions into treatment specialists from Switzerland, therapies from Germany, secretive clinics in Asia, experimental surgeries in Boston. Nothing worked. The boy remained bound to his chair, fragile, pale, and quiet. The mansion was filled with expensive silence. Charles loved his son deeply, but was consumed with frustration. Every time he saw Adrian's wheelchair, it was a reminder that there were things money simply could not buy. Over time, Charles stopped believing, and Adrian, he stopped hoping. The boy grew reserved, almost invisible, spending his days reading. In the library, staring out of the tall windows or tinkering with puzzles in silence. He spoke little, smiled less, and lived with the heavy shadow of being a disappointment in a family that measured everything in success. And then came Nia Johnson. Nia arrived on a quiet Monday morning, carrying a small suitcase and a larger sense of purpose. She was 22, tall and graceful, with warm brown skin and eyes that seemed to see through walls. She came from the South Georgia, to be exact, where she had been raised in poverty by her grandmother. Life had taught Nia resilience. She worked her way north, taking odd jobs until she landed in New York, hired as a maid in one of the wealthiest homes in America.
Oh.
Most people who entered that mansion bent beneath its weight by the chandeliers, intimidated by the servants in uniform, careful not to disturb the perfection. But not Nia. She walked with dignity, humming softly as she worked, carrying with her the warmth of her grandmother's teachings. It was Adrian who noticed her first. He rolled into the grand library one afternoon, expecting the same sterile silence. But instead, he heard a melodious, soft gospel hymn being sung as Nia dusted the shelves. She moved as though the mansion belonged to her, not to the Whitmores. Her song filled the air like sunlight slipping into a dark room. Adrian stopped, staring. No one sang in this house. No one brought joy. Nia turned, startled. But instead of looking at him with piteous, everyone always did, she smiled as though she had found a friend. "You like music?" she asked. Adrian hesitated. People rarely spoke to him so directly. Finally, he nodded. From that moment, something shifted. Nia began speaking to him whenever she saw him, casual conversations about books, music, or the strange little details of life. She didn't treat him as fragile porcelain or a tragic case. She spoke to him as though he were whole. One day, as she polished the silver in the dining room, she told him stories about her childhood, running barefoot through fields, racing cousins until the sun went down, singing with her church choir. Her grandmother, she explained, had always told her, "Your body may stumble, but your spirit will always run free." Adrian listened with wide eyes. No one in his world had ever spoken like that. The next day, as she adjusted flowers in the hall, she leaned close and asked, "Do you believe you'll ever walk?" Adrian lowered his eyes. "No, I've tried everything. I can't. It's impossible." Nia shook her head softly. "No, Adrian. The only impossible thing is what you give up on." Her words lodged deep inside him, refusing to leave. That night, Adrian lay awake staring at the ceiling. He had long stopped dreaming about walking dreams, only brought pain when he woke to the reality of his chair. But now, something inside stirred. He imagined himself standing, taking one step, then another. He could almost feel the floor beneath his bare feet. For the first time in years, he dared to want it. The next week, Adrian began to try in secret. When no one was watching, he would grip the edge of his bed or the armrest of his chair and push. His legs trembled, weak as twigs, and he fell again and again. Sweat soaked his face, his arms ached, and tears of frustration burned his eyes. But he kept hearing Nia's voice. "Your spirit runs free," Nia noticed. She never said anything, but she began leaving small signs of encouragement. She would place a sturdy chair near his bedside, as though daring him to grab it. She would slip notes under his books that read, "Try again today," and he did. Days turned into weeks. Adrian grew stronger. He could hold himself upright for seconds before collapsing, then longer. His body shook with pain, but his heart surged with pride. He began to smile against something his father had not seen in years. But Charles Whitmore remained blind to it all. One stormy evening, Charles returned home from a ruthless board meeting, his mood foul. Rain lashed the windows as he stomped upstairs. Loosening his tie, he was halfway to his study when he heard a tan-odd thud from Adrian's room, followed by a muffled cry, panicked. Strew the door open. What he saw froze him. Adrian was on the floor, his arms trembling as he tried to push himself up. His face was red with effort, tears streaking down his cheeks. Charles rushed forward. "Adrian, stop this. You'll hurt yourself." But before he could lift his son, Nia appeared from the corner, calm, steady. She knelt beside Adrian but didn't help him up. Instead, she looked at Charles. "No, Mr. Whitmore. Let him try." Charles stared at her in disbelief. "Try? He's been in that chair his whole life. He could break himself." Nia's voice cut through his panic. "He doesn't need saving. He needs believing." Adrian gritted his teeth, ignoring the storm, ignoring his father's fear. With a cry that sounded more like a roar, he pressed his hands into the floor and pushed. His legs shook violently, but they held. Slowly, unsteadily, Adrian rose. For the first time in his life, he stood. Charles's breath caught in his throat. His eyes filled with tears. He had spent fortunes on doctors who had all said never. Yet here was his son, trembling but upright because a maid had given him something no money could buy. Adrian, sobbing with joy, took one shaky step forward, then another, stumbled, collapsing into Nia's arms, but he was laughing. "I did it. I really did it." Charles sank to his knees, overwhelmed. How? How did you do this?" "No doctor, no treatment." Nia smiled softly, brushing Adrian's damp hair from his face. "I didn't heal him, sir. I just reminded him he wasn't broken." From that night on, the Whitmore mansion changed. Adrian practiced walking every day, growing stronger, his confidence blooming like spring after winter. The boy who had once hidden in silence now laughed, talked, and even dreamed aloud. He wanted to visit the park. He wanted to try sports. He wanted to live. And Charles, he saw wealth in a new light. His billions had built empires, but it was kindness and belief that gave him back his son. He promoted Nia, not just as a maid, but as Adrian's mentor, guide, and family. She was no longer a servant. She was the heartbeat of the house. Years later, when Adrian walked across the stage at his high school graduation without crutches, Charles wept openly. Nia stood beside him, proud, whispering, "Your spirit runs free." And so, the millionaire's son, who never walked, finally walked because a black maid dared to do the unbelievable.